Julian Croft felt the city's pulse as a distant, muffled drumbeat, a rhythm he no longer danced to. From the back of his chauffeured car, the December rain painted the world in streaks of grey and fractured neon, blurring the faces of laughing shoppers into abstract bursts of colour. Each warm, lit window he passed was a diorama of a life he did not lead. A family gathered around a table, a couple sharing a scarf, a child pressing a hand to the glass. They were scenes behind an impenetrable barrier, and he was the ghost on the outside looking in. His suit, a tailored armor of charcoal wool, felt more like a cage. It was the uniform of a man who commanded boardrooms and shaped skylines, but inside it, Julian was just a collection of hollow spaces. Grief was a quiet tenant in the penthouse of his soul, never making a sound, but occupying every room. He ran a hand over his face, the gesture weary. The weight of the day, settling not in his muscles, but deeper, in the marrow of his bones. He was successful. He was respected. He was profoundly, achingly alone. The car slowed, in the thick downtown traffic. Through the rain-slicked window, a small, unassuming shop caught his eye. Its sign was faded, the letters spelling "Timeless Treasures Pawn." It was a place of last resorts and forgotten stories, a graveyard for heirlooms and dreams. Something about its quiet dignity, amidst the holiday chaos, resonated with the stillness inside him. An impulse, sharp and sudden, cut through his apathy. "Stop here," he told his driver, his voice rough from disuse. He rarely spoke, unless it was to issue a command or dissect a financial report. The driver, startled, pulled smoothly to the curb. Julian stepped out, forgoing an umbrella, letting the cold rain prick at his skin. He needed to feel something, even if it was just the chill. The bell above the door chimed a sad, tinny note as he entered, announcing his arrival to a world of silent, waiting objects. The air inside was thick with the scent of old paper, polished wood, and something metallic, like old coins. Glass cases displayed a mosaic of human history. Tarnished silver lockets, guitars with missing strings, engagement rings whose promises had long since dissolved. It was a museum of endings, and in the center of it all, standing on a worn, wooden stool to see over the counter, was a little boy. He couldn't have been more than 7 years old. He had a mop of unruly brown hair and a jacket that was slightly too big for him, its sleeves rolled up to reveal small, determined hands. In those hands, he held a man's watch. It was a simple, elegant piece with a worn leather strap and a face of clean, classic lines. The boy was speaking to the proprietor, a burly man with a weary face and tired eyes, in a voice that was both small and impossibly clear. Nearby, a woman was examining a display of delicate porcelain figurines. Her back was to the counter. She had a gentle slope to her shoulders, and her coat, though clean, was frayed at the cuffs. A loose strand of honey-blonde hair had escaped her simple ponytail. She seemed lost in her own quiet world, a stark contrast to the urgent mission her son was apparently on. Julian found himself drifting closer, an unwilling eavesdropper drawn in by the strange tableau. The pawn owner squinted at the watch, then at the boy. "Look, kid, I don't know. Where's your mom or dad?" The boy's small shoulders straightened. He pushed the watch forward on the scratched glass of the countertop, his small knuckles white. His voice, when he spoke, was steady and matter-of-fact, carrying a truth so heavy it seemed to bend the air around it. "My dad went to heaven," the little boy told the pawnshop owner. "So I'm selling his watch." The words struck Julian with the force of a physical blow. They were not dramatic or tearful. They were stated as a simple, unchangeable fact. They bypassed every one of his carefully constructed defenses and hit something deep and dormant inside him. The hollow spaces ached. The silence in the shop suddenly felt sacred, profound. The pawn owner's gruff exterior seemed to soften, the lines around his eyes deepening with a flicker of something other than business. He looked from the boy to the watch, his hands hovering uncertainly. "Oh, I see, son. I'm sorry to hear that." It was then that the woman turned, her attention snagged by the sudden shift in the atmosphere. Her eyes, a warm, clear blue, widened in alarm as she saw her son at the counter. She rushed forward, her cheeks flushing with a mix of embarrassment and concern. "Leo, what are you doing? I told you to stay right with me." Her voice was soft, even in her panic. She placed a gentle hand on her son's shoulder. "I am so sorry," she said, looking at the owner, her apology encompassing everything, her son's behavior, the interruption, the awkwardness of the moment. The boy, Leo, looked up at his mother, his expression not of guilt, but of earnest purpose. "I'm trying to help, Mama. For your birthday. Dad would want me to." He pointed to the watch. "It's worth a lot. He said it was his best." The woman's face crumpled slightly. A universe of love and sorrow passed through her eyes. In a single, unguarded moment, she knelt down, bringing herself to his level, her hand stroking his hair. "Oh, my sweet boy, we don't sell Daddy's watch. Ever. It's how we remember him." Her voice was a fragile whisper, meant only for him. But in the hush of the shop, Julian heard every word. Julian had been a statue, a silent observer frozen in place, but now he felt a strange compulsion to move, to speak, to do something. The scene was too private, too raw, and yet he felt inextricably part of it. The boy's simple, selfless act of love was a beacon in the grey fog of his own existence. He saw his own grief mirrored, but also something he had lost long ago, a fierce, desperate love trying to mend a broken world. He cleared his throat, and the sound was unnervingly loud. Both the woman and the boy looked up at him. The woman's eyes were guarded, wary of this stranger in an expensive suit who was intruding on their painful, private moment. The boy's gaze was different. It was open, curious, and utterly devoid of judgment. "It's a beautiful watch," Julian said, his voice softer than he intended. He directed his words to Leo. "Your father had excellent taste." Leo puffed out his chest with pride. "He was an architect. He liked things that were built to last." The simple profundity of the statement struck Julian again. Built to last. Like love, like memory, like the pain that now constricted his chest. He looked at the woman, Clara, whose name he did not yet know. He saw the struggle in her face, the effort to hold herself together for her son. He saw her fierce pride and her deep exhaustion. "My name is Julian," he said, offering a small, hesitant smile. I couldn't help but overhear. I understand wanting to do something special for your mother's birthday." He looked back at Leo. "That's a very noble mission you're on." Clara stood up, pulling Leo slightly behind her, a protective gesture that was as subtle as it was powerful. "Thank you, but we're fine. He shouldn't have been bothering anyone. We were just getting out of the rain." Her tone was polite, but firm, a clear dismissal. She was a mother lioness, protecting her cub from a world that had already taken too much, but Julian couldn't let it go. He couldn't just walk away and leave them to their quiet struggle. For the first time in years, he felt a pull towards something other than his own insulated sorrow. He saw a flicker of the man he used to be, the man who believed in connection, the man who had not yet learned that everything he loved could be lost in the blink of an eye. "Please," he said, his voice earnest, "allow me not to buy the watch. Your son is right, and so are you. Some things are not for sale." He paused, choosing his words with a care he usually reserved for billion-dollar negotiations. "But perhaps I could contribute to the birthday mission. Consider it an investment in a worthy cause." He reached into his wallet, but Clara immediately held up a hand, her expression hardening. "No, absolutely not. We don't take charity." Her pride was a shield, bright and strong. He saw that offering money was the wrong move, a clumsy gesture from a man who had forgotten how to communicate with anything else. He retracted his hand, feeling a fool. He was out of practice with genuine human interaction. He tried a different approach, one that was less about transaction and more about connection. "Of course not. I apologize. That was indelicate of me." He looked at the rain, still streaming down the shop's front window. It's cold out there, and I was just on my way to get a hot chocolate. The best in the city is just around the corner. Would you allow me to treat you, as a thank you, for reminding an old cynic what matters?" He smiled again, and this time it felt a little more real. "And we can discuss a proper business arrangement, a consultation fee perhaps, for Leo's excellent advice on timeless gifts." Clara hesitated. She looked at her son, whose eyes were now wide with the prospect of hot chocolate. She looked at Julian, at his expensive suit and the deep sadness in his eyes that seemed to war with his gentle offer. She saw not a threat, but a man who was, perhaps, just as lonely as they were. The rain was cold, and the warmth of a cafe was tempting. More than that, the unexpected kindness was a small sunbeam breaking through the clouds of a very difficult day. "Okay," she said, the word a soft exhale of surrender. "Just for a little while." Leo beamed, his solemn mission momentarily forgotten in the face of a sweeter reward. Julian felt a lightness in his chest, a sensation so unfamiliar it was almost alarming. He had intervened, he had connected, he had stepped out of the ghost world and back into the land of the living, all because a little boy wanted to sell his father's watch to buy his mother a birthday present. The cafe was a pocket of warmth and light, smelling of roasted coffee beans, cinnamon, and melting chocolate. The low hum of conversation and the clink of ceramic mugs was a gentle symphony that stood in stark contrast to the silent rain outside. Julian led them to a small, secluded booth in the corner, its worn leather seats offering a sense of privacy and comfort. It was the kind of place he would never have noticed before, a small, insignificant detail in the city's grand design. Today it felt like a sanctuary. Leo slid into the booth first, his short legs kicking with excitement. He pressed his nose against the window, watching the blur of traffic, his reflection a faint ghost superimposed over the world outside. Clara sat opposite him, her hands clasped on the table, a residual tension still in her shoulders. Julian took the seat beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them, acutely aware of how his presence might feel like an intrusion. A waitress came, and Julian ordered for them. 2 hot chocolates with extra whipped cream for Leo and Clara, and a simple black coffee for himself. He had long since lost his taste for sweetness. When the drinks arrived, Leo's eyes lit up at the mountain of cream on his mug. He dipped a finger in and licked it clean, a smear of white left on his nose, and for the first time, Clara's face relaxed into a genuine, beautiful smile. The sight of it did something strange to Julian's carefully guarded heart. It felt like a key turning in a rusted lock. "Thank you," Clara said, her voice quiet as she wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "You really didn't have to do this." "I wanted to," Julian replied simply. He watched her. The way the steam from her drink softened the lines of weariness around her eyes. "My name is Julian Croft. Clara Evans," she responded, giving him a small nod. "And this is my co-conspirator, Leo." Leo turned from the window, his mouth ringed with chocolate. "My name is Leonardo, like the artist. My dad said I was his masterpiece." He said it with the same straightforward innocence with which he had announced his father's passing. It was not a boast, but a statement of love, received and remembered. Julian felt a pang of something sharp and painful. That's a wonderful name, and a wonderful thing for a father to say. He took a sip of his coffee, the bitterness a familiar anchor. He wanted to ask about her husband, about what happened, but he knew it was not his place. The wounds were too fresh, the ground too sacred for him to tread upon. Instead, he looked at Leo. "So, your mother's birthday is coming up?" Leo nodded enthusiastically. "On Saturday. She's going to be very old." Clara laughed, a soft, musical sound. "I'm going to be 32, you little monster." She ruffled his hair, her touch full of affection. "That's why I needed the money," Leo explained to Julian, his tone serious, as if he were closing a deal. "I want to buy her the perfume she likes, the one in the blue bottle. It smells like the garden we used to have. Clara's smile faded slightly, a shadow of memory passing over her features. Leo, sweetheart, we've talked about this. You don't need to buy me anything. Having you is the only gift I need. But Dad always got you the perfume, Leo insisted, his lower lip pushing out in a small pout. He said it was the smell of home. The conversation was a tapestry woven with threads of love and loss. Every sentence seemed to hold a ghost. Julian felt his own ghost stir in response. He thought of his wife, Amelia, and the scent of lavender that always clung to her hair. He thought of his daughter, Lily, who always smelled of crayons and sunshine. The memories, usually kept locked away, were now rising to the surface, demanding to be felt. He cleared his throat, pushing the images away. A worthy mission, he repeated, his voice a little thick. He looked directly at Clara. He's a remarkable boy. You've done an incredible job. The compliment seemed to surprise her. A faint blush rose on her cheeks. He's a good boy. He misses his father terribly. We both do. It's just been the two of us for a year now. The admission was quiet, a small piece of her story offered with hesitant trust. I'm very sorry for your loss, Julian said, and the words felt inadequate, flimsy things against the weight of her reality. He knew how hollow they could sound. He had heard them 1,000 times himself. They sat in a comfortable silence for a few moments, the only sounds the gentle murmur of the cafe and Leo happily slurping his drink. Julian realized he hadn't shared a simple, unplanned moment like this with anyone in years. His life was a series of scheduled meetings, calculated risks, and empty evenings in an apartment that was more a showroom than a home. This small booth, with this struggling mother and her fiercely loving son, felt more real than anything he had experienced in a very long time. He knew he had to honor the pretense of his invitation. About your perfume, he said, turning back to Leo. I think selling your father's watch might be a bit extreme. But I have a proposal. He leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially. I have a very important client coming to town next week, and I need a gift for her daughter. I, however, am terrible at picking gifts for children. I need an expert consultant, and I believe I've just found one. Leo's eyes widened. A consultant, what's that? It's a very important job, Julian explained. It means you give someone advice, and they pay you for your expertise. Your field of expertise would be knowing what kids like, and your first piece of advice could be helping me figure out what to get. For your help, your consultation fee would be more than enough to buy that blue bottle of perfume. Clara opened her mouth to protest, to refuse the thinly veiled charity once more. But then she looked at her son's face. It was alight with purpose and pride. He wasn't being given a handout. He was being offered a job, a mission. Julian had found a way to help. That honored her pride and her son's dignity. It was a gesture of such unexpected thoughtfulness that it disarmed her completely. She closed her mouth and simply nodded, a silent thank you passing between her and Julian. It was a moment of quiet understanding, an acknowledgement that they were both navigating a world of loss, and that sometimes a little kindness from a stranger was the only thing that made sense. I accept the job, Leo declared, sitting up straight and wiping the last of the whipped cream from his mouth with the back of his hand. My first advice is that girls like dolls, and maybe sparkly things. Julian smiled, a genuine, unforced smile that reached his eyes. Excellent advice. You're hired. He paid the bill, and as they prepared to leave, bundling up against the cold that awaited them, Julian felt a strange reluctance to let the moment end. He didn't want to go back to his silent car, his empty apartment, his hollow life. Perhaps, he began, the words coming out before he had fully formed them, we could meet this weekend, so you can give me your full consultation. We could go to the toy store at Feo Schwartz, and then we can find that perfume. He looked at Clara, his question directed at her. It was a risk, an overstep, but he had to take it. Clara hesitated, for only a second. She looked at Julian's lonely eyes and saw not a powerful CEO, but a man reaching for a lifeline. And she looked at her son, who was vibrating with an excitement she hadn't seen in him for months. "I think," she said softly, "that the consultant is available on Saturday." That Saturday, the city was draped in a fragile, crystalline blanket of snow. The harsh lines of the buildings were softened, and the world seemed quieter, holding its breath. Julian found himself standing outside the iconic toy store, not with the dread of forced holiday cheer, but with a flicker of something that felt dangerously like anticipation. He had dismissed his driver for the day, wanting to feel like a normal person, even if he had forgotten how. He saw them before they saw him. Clara was holding Leo's hand, pointing out something in a shop window. She was wearing a simple blue coat, and the cold had brought a rosy flush to her cheeks. Leo was bundled in a red scarf, his breath pluming in the air. They looked like they belonged to the world. A small, self-contained unit of warmth and love against the winter chill. A pang of envy, sharp and unwelcome, went through him. Leo spotted him, and his face broke into a wide grin. He let go of his mother's hand and ran the last few feet. "Mr. Julian, we're here for my job." "Indeed we are, Mr. Evans," Julian said, crouching down to be on the boy's level. "Report for duty." The easy banter felt foreign on his tongue, but right. Clara approached, a shy smile on her face. "Good morning. Thank you again for this. He's been talking about his very important job all week." "The pleasure is all mine," Julian said, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than necessary. He stood up, feeling an awkwardness he hadn't felt since he was a teenager. "Shall we?" Walking into the toy store was like stepping into a child's dream. It was a kaleidoscope of color, sound, and motion. Music played, giant stuffed animals stood guard, and everywhere he looked, children were laughing. For years, places like this had been minefields of painful memories for Julian. He would see a doll with blonde hair and be instantly transported back to Lily's last birthday. He would hear a father's laugh and feel the ghost of his own. But today, with Leo chattering excitedly beside him, the pain was different. It was still there, a dull ache beneath the surface, but it was accompanied by something new, a warmth. Leo took his consultancy duties very seriously. He marched Julian through the aisles, offering solemn pronouncements. "This race car is too fast for a girl," he'd say. Or, "This building block set is good, but it doesn't have enough sparkly pieces." Julian listened intently, asking follow-up questions, treating the entire affair with the gravity of a corporate merger. Clara followed a few steps behind, watching them. She saw the way Julian's stern features softened when he looked at her son. She saw a deep kindness in him, a gentleness that his expensive coat and imposing height couldn't hide. He wasn't just humoring Leo. He was engaging with him, listening to him, making him feel seen and important. It was something she knew her son desperately needed. After a thorough investigation, they settled on a magnificent dollhouse, complete with tiny furniture and a family of miniature figures. "Every girl needs a home for her dolls," Leo declared, delivering his final verdict. "An excellent choice, consultant," Julian said, and he paid for the large box, arranging to have it delivered to his office. Their first task complete, they moved on to the second part of their mission, finding the perfume. They went to a large, elegant department store, a world of polished marble and hushed reverence. It was Julian's world, but it was clearly foreign territory for Clara, who seemed to shrink a little as they walked through the glittering cosmetics department. Leo, however, was undaunted. He led them directly to a counter displaying an array of blue bottles. "That one," he said, pointing a small, certain finger. A saleswoman glided over. Clara picked up the tester bottle, a nostalgic, sad smile touching her lips. She sprayed a little on her wrist and inhaled deeply. "It smells like home," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. Julian watched her, a silent observer of her private moment with a memory. He saw the flicker of pain in her eyes, the love, the loss, all held in a single, fleeting scent. He understood. He knew how a simple thing, a smell, a song, a turn of phrase, could resurrect a ghost. "We'll take it," Julian said to the saleswoman. He paid for it before Clara could protest, using the consultation fee as his justification. He handed the elegant bag to Leo, who clutched it like a trophy. His mission was complete. They left the store and wandered into the nearby park, which was now a wonderland of fresh snow. Leo, overjoyed, immediately began trying to make a snowball with his gloved hands. Julian and Clara found a bench, brushing the snow off before they sat. For a while they just watched Leo play, his laughter echoing in the crisp air. The silence between them was not empty, but filled with unspoken thoughts. "His father, Michael," Clara said suddenly, her voice soft. "He was a good man. He loved us so much. He was designing a house for us, our forever home. He was on his way back from the site when it happened. A truck ran a red light. She spoke without tears, her voice flat, as if she had recounted the facts to herself so many times they had lost their sharp edges, leaving only a permanent heavy weight. Julian turned to her. He didn't offer platitudes or empty comforts. He simply listened. He knew that sometimes the greatest kindness was just to be a witness to someone's pain. "He sounds like he was a wonderful husband and father," Julian said when she finished. "He was," she confirmed, a single tear finally tracing a path down her cold cheek. She wiped it away quickly. "I'm sorry. I don't usually talk about it." "Don't be sorry," Julian said, his voice quiet but firm. "Grief is not something to apologize for." He paused, the confession rising in his throat, a truth he hadn't spoken aloud to a stranger in 5 years. "I know something of it myself." Clara looked at him, her blue eyes searching his. She saw the deep, settled sorrow there, the same sorrow she recognized in her own reflection. "I lost my wife, Amelia, and my daughter Lily," he said, the names feeling like stones in his mouth. "It was 5 years ago. A car accident. We were all together. I was the only one who survived." The last word was a shard of glass. He had expected her to recoil, to offer pity, which he hated, but she did neither. She simply sat with him in the cold, in the shared, terrible knowledge of what it meant to be left behind. Her hand moved, a small, instinctive gesture, and rested on his arm over his thick coat. It was not a romantic touch, but one of pure, human empathy, a simple message. "I see you. I understand." The touch was electric. It was the first time someone had touched him with such simple, unvarnished kindness in years. It breached the walls he had so carefully built, sending a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. Leo ran up to them then, his face flushed, holding up a lopsided snowball. "Look, I made a perfect circle." The spell was broken, but something had shifted between them, something profound and irreversible. They were no longer just a man, a woman, and a child. They were 3 survivors, 3 lonely souls who had found a moment of shared grace on a snowy park bench. In the weeks that followed, their Saturdays became a routine. It started under the guise of Leo's consultancy, which expanded to include advice on everything from which ties Julian should wear to which pastries were the best at the local bakery. But soon, the pretense fell away, and it was simply the 3 of them spending time together. They went to the Natural History Museum, where Leo stood in awe before the giant blue whale, and Julian found himself explaining the constellations in the planetarium, his voice filled with a passion for science he thought he had lost. He told them how Amelia had been an astronomer, how she had taught him to see stories in the stars, and in the quiet dark, with Leo nestled between them, Clara rested her head on his shoulder for just a moment, a gesture of comfort and trust that made his breath catch. He helped her find a new job. She had been working as a part-time bookkeeper for a small, struggling company. Julian, through a discreet call to a friend, learned of an opening for an office manager at a growing architectural firm. It utilized her skills perfectly and offered better pay and stability. He presented it to her as a simple tip he'd overheard. carefully erasing his own fingerprints from the opportunity so she would feel it was something she earned entirely on her own. And she did. She excelled, her quiet competence and warmth winning over her new colleagues immediately. With her new salary, she and Leo were able to move into a slightly larger apartment in a nicer neighborhood, one with a small park just down the street. Julian helped them move, showing up one Saturday in jeans and a sweater, a version of himself Clara had never seen. He lifted boxes, assembled furniture, and sweated alongside her. At the end of the long day, they ordered pizza and ate it on the floor of the living room, surrounded by cardboard boxes. Leo fell asleep with his head in Clara's lap. "I can't thank you enough, Julian," Clara said, her voice soft in the dim light. "For everything. The job. This. You've changed our lives." "You've changed mine," he answered, his voice raw with a sincerity that surprised even himself. He looked around the small, cozy apartment. It was a home, filled with the promise of a new beginning. He realized, with a startling clarity, that he hadn't felt this content, this at peace, in 5 years. The hollow spaces inside him were beginning to fill with something new, something that felt terrifyingly like hope. Leo, in his sleep, murmured something and shifted. He had taken to drawing pictures for Julian. They weren't just of dinosaurs or rocket ships anymore. They were pictures of the three of them. One drawing was taped to the refrigerator in Julian's sterile, empty kitchen. It showed a tall stick figure with dark hair, a smaller stick figure with brown hair, and a medium stick figure with yellow hair. They were all holding hands under a brightly shining sun. Underneath, in a child's wobbly script, Leo had written, "My family." The drawing was both a comfort and a terror. It represented a happiness Julian desperately wanted, but one he was terrified he didn't deserve. He was a man marked by tragedy. He had failed to protect his first family. What gave him the right to have a second? The fear was a cold undercurrent beneath the warmth of his new connection with Clara and Leo. It was a ghost at the feast, waiting for its moment to strike. The invitation arrived on a crisp, embossed card. It was for the annual Croft Enterprises Winter Gala, the glittering pinnacle of the corporate social calendar. It was an event Julian usually endured, a performance of power and success he had perfected over the years. This year, however, the thought of it filled him not with boredom, but with a new, strange idea. He wanted Clara to be there with him. He wanted to show her his world, not to impress her, but to integrate her into it. He wanted to stand with her in a room full of people and have her by his side. It was a reckless, impulsive desire, and it scared him more than any boardroom battle ever had. He asked her over dinner at a quiet Italian restaurant a few nights later. He had arranged for a trusted sitter for Leo. It was their first real date, and the air between them crackled with a nervous energy. "It's a stuffy corporate event," he said, trying to downplay it. "Lots of boring speeches and terrible small talk. You would be doing me a great favor if you came." A friendly face in the crowd. Clara looked down at her hands, a hesitant smile on her lips. "Julian, I don't have anything to wear to a gala." "Let me take care of that," he said quickly. "Please, just say you'll think about it." She agreed to think about it. And the next day, a courier delivered a series of boxes to her office. Inside were several elegant evening gowns, shoes and accessories, all chosen with impeccable taste by a personal shopper he had hired. There was a note attached in his own handwriting. "Choose your armor, I'll be your knight." The gesture, so thoughtful and yet so extravagant, overwhelmed her. But it was the simple, heartfelt note that convinced her. She chose a deep, sapphire blue gown that matched her eyes. When she looked in the mirror on the night of the gala, she barely recognized herself. She looked elegant, beautiful, and impossibly sophisticated. When Julian arrived to pick her up, he was speechless. He had seen her beauty in her simple coats and gentle smiles, but now it was breathtaking. "Clara," he breathed, his eyes full of an admiration that was raw and real. "You look magnificent." The gala was a sea of black ties, diamonds, and forced smiles. The ballroom was opulent, dripping with crystals and smelling of expensive perfume and ambition. Clara felt like an imposter, a simple sparrow in a flock of peacocks. But Julian stayed close, his hand resting reassuringly on the small of her back. He introduced her simply as my guest, Clara Evans, his tone leaving no room for questions. For a while, it was fine. They danced, a slow, graceful waltz where he held her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. In the circle of his arms, with the music swelling around them, the rest of the room faded away. It was just the two of them. He leaned in, his lips close to her ear. "I'm so glad you're here," he whispered. But the real world could not be kept at bay for long. While Julian was pulled away by a board member, Clara was approached by a woman named Victoria Davenport, a senior executive known for her sharp tongue and sharper ambition. Victoria looked Clara up and down, her smile a thin, cruel line. "I don't believe we've been introduced. You must be the new project Julian has taken on. It's so like him to get involved in a good cause." The words were coated in false sweetness, but the insult was clear. She was implying Clara was a charity case, a gold digger. Clara's cheeks burned. She opened her mouth to respond, but her voice failed her. She was out of her depth, unequipped for this kind of casual cruelty. Julian returned at that moment, his face darkening as he took in the scene. He had heard Victoria's last remark. "Victoria," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "Clara is my guest, and you will treat her with respect." Victoria merely laughed, a tinkling, unpleasant sound. "Of course, Julian. I'm just so surprised to see you with anyone. After all this time, one has to wonder what her angle is. A single mother, I hear. How convenient." The words hit Julian like a physical blow. It wasn't the insult to Clara that undid him. It was the ugly, twisted reflection of his own deepest fears, that he was putting a target on her back, that his world, with its sharp edges and casual cruelties, would devour her, that he, a man who had already failed to protect one family, was recklessly endangering another. He saw a flash of memory. Amelia, laughing in a dress the same color as Clara's, just hours before the accident. The image was so vivid, so painful, it stole the air from his lungs. The old, familiar panic began to rise. Cold and suffocating, he was tainting Clara with his tragedy. He was bringing her into a life that would hurt her. The only way to protect her was to push her away. His posture changed. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by an icy distance. He turned to Clara, his expression unreadable, his face a mask of cold control. "It's late. I should take you home." The ride back to her apartment was suffocatingly silent. The easy connection they had shared was gone, replaced by a thick wall of glass. Clara, hurt and confused, tried to break the silence. "Julian, what that woman said doesn't matter." He cut her off, his voice flat. He kept his eyes fixed on the road. When they reached her building, he didn't get out of the car. He just put it in park, the engine humming in the quiet street. "Thank you for coming," he said, the words formal, empty. "Julian, what's wrong?" she pleaded, her voice small. "Talk to me." He finally turned to look at her, and his eyes were the eyes of the stranger she had first met in the pawn shop. Guarded, distant, and full of a pain he refused to share. "This was a mistake," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "We live in different worlds, Clara. It's better this way." It was a dismissal, a clinical, brutal amputation. Before she could even process the words, he was leaning over to open her door. She got out, stunned, the beautiful gown feeling like a costume for a play that had ended in tragedy. She watched as his car pulled away without a backward glance, disappearing into the night, leaving her alone on the cold pavement. The days that followed were filled with a deafening silence. Julian didn't call. He didn't text. It was as if their Saturdays, their shared laughter, their quiet confessions on a park bench, had never happened. He had simply excised her from his life. The withdrawal was absolute. A door slammed shut and bolted from the inside. Clara was adrift in a sea of confusion and hurt. She went through the motions of her life, work, making dinner, reading bedtime stories, but a grey pall had fallen over everything. Julian's sudden coldness made no sense. She replayed the night of the gala over and over, trying to understand what had changed. She knew what Victoria had said was cruel, but she couldn't believe it was enough to shatter everything they had been building. Leo felt the change immediately. "Is Mr. Julian mad at us?" he asked one evening, his small face clouded with worry. "Is my consultancy job over?" "No, sweetie," Clara said, her heart aching. "He's just very busy." But the lie tasted like ash in her mouth. The light that Julian had brought back into her son's life was gone, and she didn't know how to explain it. Meanwhile, Julian was drowning in his self-imposed isolation. He threw himself into his work with a desperate fury, working late into the night, filling his hours so he wouldn't have to think, wouldn't have to feel. His apartment was silent again, the hollow spaces he had started to fill now yawning wider and more desolate than ever. He had done the right thing, he told himself. He had protected her, he had cut her out of his life before his tragedy could become hers. It was a noble sacrifice, but it felt like self-destruction. Every time he looked at the drawing on his refrigerator, the 3 stick figures holding hands under the sun, it was a fresh torment. He was safe from repeating his past, but he had sentenced himself to a future without light, without warmth, without love. He had chosen the familiar comfort of his grief over the terrifying vulnerability of hope. The catalyst for change came, as it always did, from Leo. A week after the gala, Clara was helping him with his homework when he pushed a folded piece of paper across the table. It was a new drawing. It showed a single, tall stick figure, Julian, standing alone under a cluster of dark, angry rain clouds. His drawn-on face had a sad, downturned mouth. He looked small and lost, even though he was the only person in the picture. On the back, in Leo's careful, determined printing, were 4 simple words. "We can fix it." Clara's breath hitched. In the simple drawing, her son had captured the truth more clearly than she ever could. Julian wasn't a cold, cruel man who had callously discarded them. He was a sad, lonely man who was hiding. He wasn't pushing them away out of malice. He was pushing them away out of fear. And Leo, with the pure, unwavering faith of a child, believed it could be fixed. A new resolve hardened within her. She would not let his fear win. She would not let him condemn them all to loneliness because of something a cruel woman had said. Their connection was real, it was important, and it was worth fighting for. The next morning, she took the drawing, placed it in an envelope, and went to the gleaming glass tower of Croft Enterprises. She had no appointment. She knew she would never get past the fortress of security and receptionists, but she had to try. As she expected, the woman at the front desk was polite but firm. Mr. Croft was in meetings all day. He wasn't accepting visitors. "Please," Clara said, her voice shaking slightly, but full of conviction. "It's important. Can you just make sure he gets this?" She handed the envelope across the vast marble desk. The receptionist took it, her expression professionally non-committal. Clara had done all she could. She turned and walked out of the cold, imposing lobby, feeling a mix of foolishness and quiet defiance. The envelope landed on Julian's desk an hour later, placed there by his efficient executive assistant. He saw the unfamiliar, neat handwriting and almost tossed it aside. But something made him pause. He opened it. He pulled out the folded drawing. He saw the lonely stick figure of himself under the rain clouds. He saw the sad mouth. He felt a crack appear in the icy wall around his heart. Then he turned it over. "We can fix it." 4 words. 4 simple, powerful words from a 7-year-old boy. They weren't an accusation. They weren't a plea. They were a statement of fact, a declaration of faith. They sliced through his layers of fear, grief, and misguided self-preservation with the clean, sharp edge of truth. He was not protecting Clara and Leo by hiding. He was hurting them. He was hurting himself. He was letting the ghosts of his past dictate the future, letting fear author the rest of his life story. He had been so focused on the ending, he was afraid of that he was throwing away the beautiful beginning that was right in front of him. The drawing wasn't just a drawing, it was a lifeline. He shot up from his desk, his chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. He grabbed his coat, ignoring the startled look from his assistant. He ran. He didn't wait for the elevator, taking the stairs two at a time, his heart pounding in his chest with a desperate urgency. He had to find her. He had to fix it. He burst out of the building onto the busy street, his eyes scanning the crowds of people, searching for her. He had no idea where she would have gone. He ran to the corner, his gaze sweeping the street, a frantic, hopeless prayer on his lips. And then he saw her. She was standing at a bus stop across the street, huddled in her blue coat, her shoulders slumped in defeat. She looked small and vulnerable against the towering city. "Clara!" he yelled, his voice raw. He didn't wait for the light, darting through a break in the traffic, earning a chorus of angry horns. He didn't care. Nothing else mattered. She heard her name and looked up, her eyes widening in disbelief as she saw him running towards her. He reached her, breathless, his chest heaving. He stood in front of her, searching for the words. He had orchestrated billion-dollar deals, given speeches to thousands, but he had never felt so utterly tongue-tied. "I'm sorry," he finally managed to say, the words torn from the deepest part of him. "Clara, I am so sorry. I was a fool. I was a coward." He reached out and took her hands, his grip gentle but firm. "What that woman said at the gala, it didn't bother me because I believed it. It bothered me because it echoed every fear I have. Fear that I'm not good enough, fear that I'll fail you, fear that I'll bring the sadness that follows me into your life and Leo's." Tears welled in his eyes, the first he had shed in years. He didn't bother to wipe them away. "When I lost Amelia and Lily, I didn't just lose them. I lost myself. I built walls around my heart to keep the pain in. But I realized they were also keeping the love out. They were keeping you out." He looked down at their joined hands. "These last few months with you and Leo, it's been like coming back to life. You didn't just fill the silence, you brought the music back, and I got scared. I panicked. I thought the only way to protect you was to go back to being that empty man in his empty apartment. But I was wrong. The biggest danger to you isn't my past, it's my fear. And I'm done being afraid." He looked up, his gaze intense, laying his soul bare for her on a busy city street. "I love you, Clara. I think I've been falling in love with you since the moment I saw you in that dusty pawn shop. And I love your son. I want to be in your lives, not as a guest or a client, but as family. If you'll have me." He squeezed her hands. "Let me help you fix it. Let us fix it. Together." Tears were streaming down Clara's face now, but they were tears of relief, of overwhelming joy. She had seen the good man in him, the kind, wounded soul, and she had gambled everything on the hope that he would find his way back. And he had. She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. "Oh, Julian," she sobbed, "there was never anything to fix. You just had to come home." He held her tightly, the sounds of the city fading away, until all he could hear was the beating of his own heart, finally in rhythm with someone else's. He was not a ghost anymore. He was here, he was alive, and he was home. A few months later, spring had chased the last of the winter chill from the city. The trees in the park were bursting with green, and the air was sweet with the scent of blossoms and damp earth. It was the same park where Julian had first confessed his loss to Clara. But today, the atmosphere was entirely different. It was not a place of shared sorrow, but one of shared joy. Julian was pushing Leo on a swing, his suit jacket and tie, long since discarded, on the bench next to Clara. His sleeves were rolled up, and he was laughing, a deep, genuine sound that echoed through the playground. Leo was soaring, his little legs kicking, his face alight with pure delight, as he yelled, "Higher, Julian, higher!" Clara watched them, a contented smile on her face. This was their new routine, their new normal. Julian was no longer just a weekend visitor. He was a constant, steady presence in their lives. He was there for homework and bedtime stories. He was there for scraped knees and silly jokes. He had seamlessly woven himself into the fabric of their small family, stitching the torn edges of all their hearts together. He slowed the swing, bringing a giggling Leo to a stop. He walked over to the bench and sat down beside Clara, his arm draping naturally around her shoulders. He pressed a soft kiss to her temple. "He has your laugh," Julian said, his voice full of warmth. "And he has your stubbornness," she teased back, leaning her head against his shoulder. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Leo run off to the slide. The world felt right. It felt whole. Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet-wrapped box. It wasn't a ring box. It was square. He handed it to Clara. "This is for Leo," he said, "but I wanted you to see it first." She carefully unwrapped it. Inside, nestled on a bed of satin, was Michael's watch. It was the same simple, elegant timepiece from the pawnshop, but it had been restored. The crystal was polished to a brilliant shine. The casing gleamed, and the worn leather strap had been replaced with a new one, identical to the original. It looked timeless, its quiet dignity fully renewed. "I had it cleaned," Julian explained. "I thought, when he's older, he should have it, a piece of his father to carry with him, a reminder of the man who loved him first." Clara's eyes filled with tears. It was a gesture of such profound respect and understanding. He wasn't trying to replace Michael. He was helping to preserve his memory. He was honoring the love that had come before, even as they built a new love of their own. "Julian," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "it's perfect." He called Leo over. The boy ran to them, his cheeks flushed from playing. Julian knelt down, holding the open box. "Leo," he said seriously, "I have something for you. This was your dad's." Leo looked at the watch, his eyes wide with reverence. He reached out a small finger and gently touched the glass face. "It's so shiny now." "Your dad was a man who liked things that were built to last," Julian said, echoing the boy's own words from that first day. "This is a part of him, and one day, when you're big enough, you'll wear it, and you'll remember how much he loved you, and you'll know that it's okay to love the people who are here with you now, too. Love doesn't run out, buddy. The heart just makes more room." Leo looked from the watch to Julian, and then to his mother. He didn't fully understand all the words, but he understood the feeling behind them. He launched himself into Julian's arms, hugging him tightly around the neck. "I love you, Julian," he said, his small voice muffled against Julian's shoulder. Julian hugged him back, his eyes closing as he held the boy. "I love you too, Leo," he murmured. "More than you know." Later that day, as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the city, the three of them walked home, hand in hand in hand. They were a portrait of a family, not one born of biology, but one forged in loss, kindness, and the improbable, beautiful courage to hope again. They were no longer three lonely souls. They were a constellation, each a point of light made brighter by the presence of the others. They had found their way out of the dark. They were home.